Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we explore how work is transforming one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today we'll look at brand new data about how workers are feeling, learning, and navigating their careers as we head into a year shaped by AI and new expectations from work. ManpowerGroup's new Global Talent Barometer shows a workforce in a lot of uncertainty. People are confident in their skills, but anxious about technology. They're eager for stability, yet actively searching for opportunity and increasingly skeptical of traditional career paths. AI use is rising across industries, but confidence in AI is falling sharply. Workers want growth, but they want it inside their organizations. And the strongest signal of all, capability is becoming the true currency of the labor market, overtaking credentials, tenure, and even education as the measure of what shapes opportunity. To explore what all this means for all of us, navigating our careers and inside companies, I'm joined by Becky Frankiewicz, President and Chief Strategy Officer at ManpowerGroup, one of the world's largest and most influential workforce solutions company. Becky, welcome to the Future of Less Work.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I love the title, by the way, of your podcast, The Future of Less Work, because that is exactly what the next generation of workers and leaders are looking for.
Okay, let's start there. That's really interesting because when I called it The Future of Less Work, I wasn't thinking the dystopian version. I was actually thinking that we should all be doing less of what doesn't matter, of more of what does. What do you think is happening?
Yeah, I'd say that's precisely less of what matter and more of what does. Workers are looking for different choices in terms of balance over barriers. Like they want work-life balance. They don't want the barriers that stand in the way, but they do still want both. They want employment security over risk. They want skill building over time versus, when I came out of college, I wanted this super highway for career building. They're looking for a much more even approach, I would say, across their work and their life. So I think it's the future of less work and doing work that actually means something and is purposeful to you. And so that's why I love the title of your podcast.
Thank you. And it's interesting that you say that because I actually have been calling this a new social contract, right? And it's a really hard thing to sell to organizations because we think AI comes in, it takes away tasks. Immediately, everybody wants to fill up the space with more work, right? And I think that there's a conversation happening about what should we be doing with that space that, just got freed up.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. AI does take tasks, but it's humans that get to redefine jobs. It's us that get to say, how do we want to spend our time in the service of ourselves and of the companies that we choose to serve? And choose is a very important word post-COVID. As you might expect, the labor market had quite a bit of balancing or rebalancing during and then after, and I would say continues to do so. But this idea of filling the time with more traditional definitions of work, employees are going to reject that because they're looking to add contribution. It's not that workers don't want to work. They want to add meaningful contribution. And ironically, AI does give us the opportunity to do that as long as we're, well-versed in its capabilities.
So from an organization perspective, right, we're used to that orchestration happening from the top. So the creator economy, right? So if suddenly we tell people, right, AI freed up time, what can we do? How do we add value? What's meaningful? Do you think organizations are set up to be able to manage that?
Definitely not. So definitely not set up to be able to manage that. And I honestly think, Nirit, we don't know. We don't know exactly how AI is going to play out. And yet we're all trying to write the end, the page at the end of the book that says the end. We're all trying to write the end when we're not clear on the beginning. And so there is a lot of hype and talk, and there are increasingly usage. The majority of the workforce now uses some form of AI. It may not be for work, but this idea of what is AI and how do I use it? My kids will use it to plan a road trip. Like people are using AI, but now the challenge is how do I actually use it in my job? And who decides that? Does the organization decide that? Does the employee decide that? And to use your language of a new contract, honestly, it's going to be a together decision. It's going to be, how can I contribute? I know my outcomes as a worker better than anyone else. Let me help you define how I can use AI and my own capabilities to the benefit of the organization. And the organization is going to say, this is where we're headed. This is where we want to drive efficiency. And that contract of mutual contribution is going to be critical, especially when we don't know the end. We don't even know the beginning.
So I really like where this conversation is going. And I think part of it is because, no, we don't have answers, right? And we shouldn't. Yet so much of the conversation around AI and people and work is fear-based, right? It's I'll bring in a tool, replace you, and you either have to, make yourself viable or, you'd lose your job. And I wonder, what do organizations need to totally revisit and how they think about implementing AI inside the work to actually create the value that comes from the bottom, from people figuring it out?
Yes, this is a great point. Take a bit of a step back to say the economy has shifted. AI is one contributor to that, but this economic uncertainty is actually a bigger concern for the workers around the world today. And to know more about this, ManpowerGroup launched a talent barometer for 14,000 workers in 19 countries. And we basically asked them about their well-being, job satisfaction, and confidence in the workplace. Because there's been tremendous amount of studies, many of which we have done, that say, what do employers want? There have been very few on what do employees want. And this is a pivotal time as there's so much uncertainty, whether it's political, geopolitical, economically, there's so much uncertainty and technologically and AI, that this is the time to ask workers. And interestingly, we found 4, I would say, key takeaways from engaging these 14,000 workers. And I'll highlight them. And one of them speaks to the question that you asked. One of my favorites. So we talked about quiet quitting. Remember the days of quiet quitting. So now job hugging is replacing job hopping, because workers they're choosing stability. Back to your opening, on the rebalancing, they're choosing stability. But this is where, over 60% of workers intend to stay put. And yet over 30%, a third, believe that they could be forced out in the next 6 months. Some of that is AI. A lot of that is economic uncertainty. But when you bring them together, they are macro forces that are impacting worker confidence. So that's the first takeaway that addresses the question you asked me.
So, so I'm thinking, but that's also why organizations think that the power has shifted, right? Because when we talk about the kind of the post-COVID quitting and a lot of what was going on, we all remembered life was short, right? And every day we go to work is a day of our life we trade better be worth it. And we started making decisions. And then people took over power. And you see that in a lot of how the changes got implemented in terms of flexibility and autonomy and all sorts of changes. And it's not just knowledge workers. And now suddenly it feels like the power has shifted back because job hugging basically says, please don't fire me.
Yeah, I actually think it's deeper than that. I think that is how it can appear. But I think it's actually humans saying, I choose stability right now. I choose stability. So it's not the employers that are saying you must stay. We're seeing, that lateral is the new vertical in terms of people growing their careers. They're changing titles, but not changing companies. And so I actually think employers are saying, we want you to stay. And employees are saying, okay, for me to stay, this is what I expect. I expect career growth. I expect stability. And so I don't think it's a forced position. I think it's actually a choice. And I appreciate that employers, instead of stopping at the power has shifted, they're actually saying, hey, we actually want the same thing. I want you to stay and you want to stay. So now how do we make that meaningful? And I'm loving this internal mobility that's happening in companies versus we've depended on the overall labor market to create mobility of workers. Now we're starting to see that inside companies. And we've talked about this for a decade, at least a decade, that this was essential. And it took the circumstances we're in now to make it happen. And honestly, I think it took a change in what employees wanted as well as what employers wanted.
So how do you see that changing the career path or the internal kind of process of the evolution of the career?
Yeah, so you opened with it. We're starting to see this emergence of versus credentials, versus your degree. What do you actually have the capability to do? And it doesn't mean you have all the capability today. You have the underlying capability to do these jobs. And therefore, I can move you into different parts of the organization. I grew up in a time where people would talk about the T. So you would have a depth of capability in one area and just a little bit of breadth in several things. Now it is no longer that way. It's the fact that you need to have the inverse. You need to have actual capabilities in various areas that you can apply to many different parts of the organization. And I don't think that's new for humanity, by the way. I think we as humans evolve and we have agility. It's very new in the workplace. The employer choosing to see us as a composition of our skills and capabilities versus the degree I have or the last job title I have. It's new. So why is that happening? Not to be a bit jaded, but part of the reason that's happening is we went through COVID and employers got very afraid about finding talent. I mean, it was this talent hoarding that happened. They became very afraid of this remarkable resource that we had taken as an on-the-spot kind of resource versus something that we needed to create and nurture. So I think that was a positive adjustment. And again, I think we as humans have decided we can grow without changing jobs. I don't have to change companies to actually grow. And that's not always been the case. And so we're seeing this redefinition of the contract between the worker and the employer that I actually think builds the employee's capability. It gives them the security they're seeking, but it also gives the company the growth that they need to deliver to the marketplace. And I don't know if this is forever. The other thing we have looming in the background, it's a very complicated landscape right now. The other piece we have looming is we have talent shortage. So employers are saying, I can't, 70% of the skills I need, I can't find. Again, speaks to I have to create them, which is a different agreement. And we also have that the population in most countries, overwhelming majority of countries around the world, is not growing. And so we need AI to take some of those tasks because we won't have the humanity to do it. And so we have this confluence of things happening that I think actually require this new relationship between employer and employee that we've never seen before. So if we both play this right, we unlock potential and growth in new ways.
So this is really interesting. You're basically saying, okay, first of all, you can maximize your potential and create new career paths and growth capabilities within the organization.
Yes.
You're also telling the organization you need to go provide the training, the skills, the ability to learn, relearn, unlearn, and the whole cycle, right?
Yes.
Within organizations, because you can't just fire the people and hire new ones. They don't exist, right? Yes. How do we build these new muscles? Because it's not a contract we've had before.
Yes. Well, and the data is disheartening. So almost 60% of the 14,000 that we polled had no training in the last 6 months, near none, zero. Overwhelming majority don't have any mentors. And so we're going to have to go back to a prior playbook of how do we mentor and nurture capability versus individuals. So the old model is you're a high potential and therefore we invest in you. That will continue, I believe, but there's going to be high potential skills that we need to elevate in the organization. And that requires a whole new way to assess talent. Like we can't look at you based on the degree that you have in school. And I'm sure we'll get to the decline in degrees in terms of demand as we have talent shortage and human shortage. But we can't just look at people based on what they've done. We have to look at people based on what they can do. And that requires a new way of assessing. So that would be the first step, is looking at people by their skill. And I think us as individuals looking at ourselves by our skills as well. If you say to someone, tell me about your CV, they can rattle off the jobs that they've had. They may even be able to rattle off the measurable impact it contributed. If you say, what skills do you have that created that environment of success? That's where we start falling short in our answers. And so we have to be better at thinking of ourselves as a composition of skills, and employers have to be better at assessing that and also leveraging that in new ways for growth.
Yeah, we've been talking about the need to hire for skills and capabilities for quite some time. And we will get to external hiring in a minute, because you're right, the data shows, right? There's a decline in the degrees or the requirements for degrees. But essentially, we've known for a really long time that degrees are just our way to filter a proxy for skills and capabilities and potential, because we just don't know how to measure, but coming from the outside. But if we stick for a moment longer inside the organization, I'm not sure we've learned to document and turn it into data that's searchable and is able to we can do something with it. The whole idea of what are your skills and capabilities, and how do I help you understand who else needs them in the organization, which is what else you can do.
Yes. Well, I would take it even a step back from that. We don't understand the skills that are needed to do a job.
Yeah, that's true.
We don't
Yeah.
understand that. And now with AI, and again, I think AI is still very much in development, but what can AI do? So what are the skills needed in the job? What are those tasks that AI can take on? And then what then therefore are the human skills that we need to have for growth? I think all of that is increasingly known. That doesn't mean known, increasingly known, but not actioned. And if we don't start with the unit of measure that today is a job, what will it be called tomorrow? I don't know. But today it's a job, it's an output. If we don't start with that, then I don't know where to leverage technology and where to leverage humanity. And I think it's one of our challenges, because we're just like, AI is going to save us. Well, what is the problem we're trying to solve?
Yeah. So my hypothesis on what you just said is we have for a really long time focused even our work, right? We were working hands and thinking minds. And so we know how to describe the skills that these hands and minds deliver on, right? Now, when technology takes away our hands and, portions of our minds, we're struggling to understand the nuances of human contribution. Some of us think that there isn't any, which is that, we can swap people for agents. But if you understand that you need them, I'm not even sure we have the words to describe the nuances of the soft skills. I don't know if we should call them soft skills, but the human skills.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what soft skills can be leveraged as universal. So what are those groupings of soft skills that I can play in multiple ways? What are the groupings of hard skills that I can play in multiple ways? And so I think it will be a whole new language. And to me, I absolutely do not buy into the idea that agents can take all of human work. We're actually fairly close to that. And I've done pretty extensive analysis. There are certain things that agents should be able to do, not yet proven, but should be able to do. But there's a lot that they just will not have the capability to do on a horizon that we can see. But I think this new language, this new architecture for work, at a time when humans want something different from work, I actually think it's a very exciting time. It's uncertain, but it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but just let that slip away. What do you think is that human architecture, that element that is something that the agents won't be able to do, at least for some, foreseeable future?
Yeah. So today, from everything we've seen, and again, most agents are not active, where you have active agents and they're not doing reasoning, they're doing execution of jobs that we've defined. So think about what happened in call centers. In call centers, humans have and are continuing to train the agents on what happens when someone says this, when the tone does this, what happens. But still, this idea of reasoning, we've not seen executing against a rule-based environment. Again, not at scale, but we're starting to see proof points of that. But anything that requires reasoning. So let me give you an example. I call in and say, I need to change an appointment for a doctor. No problem. Agents can go look at a calendar and execute because it's rule-based. They know I'm coming in for an annual physical. They know that takes 30 minutes. They know with the calendar, they can execute that. I call and say, I'm coming in because I'm not feeling well. And here are 4 things that I think are happening, because, we're not the best judges of our physical wellness or illness. I say, here are 4 things I think. Well, those 4 things may or may not fall into any data set. So there's reasoning that's required. It could be this, this, or this. That is when they will need to pass you off to a human who has had experience in that and can say, she said these 4 things, but these 3 things really mean it's a cold versus the flu. And when reasoning is required, that's where agents are falling short today. Which, think about the jobs that we do, a lot of the work that humans contribute is reasoning, which is also why we've seen software developers, which are still in huge demand. Like the headlines would make you think we don't need them at all anymore. Software developers are still one of the top 10 jobs in demand in around the world. But we don't need that rote memorization part of software developers. That can be automated. But anything that requires, if this happens, then it could be these three things requires a human. So it just is where we are. Now, will agents catch up? Will they be able to logic and reason? We haven't seen that. It's talked about, but in the headlines. But when you really dig into organizations and development, we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Okay. That's we'll see where this goes, but let's kind of get back to that degree question, right? Because what we are seeing though is less entry level hiring for people coming out with degrees, which is making the assumption that what they know, agents know too.
Well, I think so. What we're actually seeing is this hiring is shifting from, what I would call pedigree to potential. Like, what's your potential? And you're right. Our data, and we look at real time data around the world in every country and territory. Our data shows that entry level roles requiring a degree are down 23% year over year. So that's a quarter. That's a big number. Entry level roles now, and degree free roles. So what a new term that is, by the way. Degree free roles. Degree free roles are up 2% year to date. And so this idea that you don't need a degree at all, regardless if you're entry level. So we are seeing something on that. But what the data would show is I'm not sure the relationship, and it's a genuine, I'm not sure the relationship is clearly from AI, because as we ask employers and we ask employees, a lot of this is being driven by economic uncertainty. I don't know what the future is going to look like for growth. I don't know this relationship of GDP, what's going to happen with interest rates, what happens geopolitically. And so we haven't been able to pull apart what of this is truly AI. And a piece of it is, I believe, my hypothesis is that it is. A very large piece of this is economic uncertainty, employers waiting to see what AI rolls out with and or what happens economically, employees staying put until I see what happens with AI. And so I don't think we can, at least the data I have wouldn't say we can attribute all of this to AI. I think it's a contributor to uncertainty, and that's what I would attribute it to.
So historically, we've still told young people, right? If you go get a degree, your chances of having a job and having a higher paying job and having a kind of a better career are higher than if you don't have a degree. And I think there's a question these days, and I'm not sure it's about whether we should or shouldn't be teaching young people something kind of into their school years, or we're just maybe not teaching the right things. Or maybe we're teaching them the things that AI can really take over, and we're not teaching them the human skills we just talked about.
Yeah, so I have a fairly perhaps controversial, depending on your listeners' view on higher education. I do think a lot happens in university besides learning the textbook, if you will. But I'll put that to the side for a moment. The whole context of tenure. So think about what tenure means. You earn tenure in a university setting. It means that my field, I've perfected it, if you will. I've studied it. I know it. There's demand for it. And therefore, I am essential enough to the university to keep me forever. And I'm being dramatic on purpose, forever. Okay, there is nothing essential enough over the horizon that we will keep forever. We need agility in our universities, just like we need agility in our workers. And so I am hoping and waiting to see how higher education responds to this environment where, and you spoke to it earlier, where I have to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And by the way, we as humans do that better than AI. We learn, unlearn, and relearn better than AI, because AI can learn, but unlearning and relearning is a different challenge, back to human differences. But this idea that tenure means I am forever, I think that has to be turned on its head. And we have to identify agility and pockets of learning that we will constantly change our curriculum, just like we're constantly changing our jobs. I mean, skills are the new currency. Skills are moving at the pace of technology. And that I can say we are seeing. Now, technology right now may be moving slower than the headlines are moving, but skills are the currency, and they are moving at the pace of technology. And I don't see that changing. I see that accelerating.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I'm thinking you talk about academics, but let's say something similar about leadership and the knowledge that because leaders came up in organizations of the past. And so they've created the skill set that helps them navigate what was. How do we help them navigate what's coming?
Yeah, so it's such a fascinating discussion. I was on a panel, I won't say at the institution, but one of the very prestigious institutions in the world. And I walked in, and everybody had 5 degrees and had written 4 books, and I'm me. I was college educated, obviously, but have not spent my life on academics. But the whole discussion was on the death of the CEO. It was, we're at the end of the era of the CEO, and they won't be necessary. And what I said is they're actually just changed. And so if you think about career paths, we all grew up doing multiple jobs so that by the time you got to the manager, vice president, CEO level, you'd actually done every job. So you'd seen everything. So you're the oracle for answers. Everybody knows you have the answer. I think now it's actually flipped the organization on its head. And the CEO is actually this chief question officer. They have to know enough to ask the right questions, which then opens up, I could go a whole side story for you on it, opens up such different requirements of leaders. Now, I use CEO as the example, but of leaders, we have to have humility. We have to have situational awareness of what we do not know, not what we do know. It's so much more important for leaders to understand what we don't know versus what we do know. Microsoft is famous for saying moving from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. And I would say leaders have to be the ones who ask it all. You have to have enough knowledge to ask the right questions. But the days of the leaders at any level having all the answers, I believe those are behind us.
So I totally agree. In fact, a president of a very large global company recently told me on a podcast that he learns more from the students coming in kind of after college than from his peers. Yeah. But I think the interesting question when you think about still the leadership skills and capabilities, we ask questions, we still rely on intuition, and we rely on all that experience that got us here to assess whether that's, the right direction or not. This whole conversation, and we're not talking about offices in this, we don't need to talk about offices and hybrid work, but just the headlines on return to, and I keep saying you can't return to the future, right? It's not the right direction. So trying to bring people back to the way things were, the structures, the offices, the systems, because it's what we're comfortable with and what we know how to manage. And I'm trying to figure out, how do we move beyond that, right?
Yes, well, I think you're right. I think we try as humans, we try to fit things into something that we know. Yeah. And again, back to leadership capabilities, this idea of unleashing potential in others becomes so much more important than I would say it's been in my multiple decades of work now. The idea to see someone for what they could do and where they can contribute, I think is quite unique. And I know we won't go deep on the workplace, but I'll just say the workplace is more about where I can make my best contribution. And in some jobs, that means I need to sit with others because we think together, or my personal styles, we think together. And in others, you don't, in other situations, you don't have to work that way. And we have to become, as employers, experts in the N = 1 economy for talent. It's an N = 1 economy. And yes, that's in part due to population shortage and talent shortage, but it's much more due, in my view, about how we see ourselves now as employees. And Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're completely different in how they view the workplace. I'm sure you're very close to the research on increasingly Gen Z will say, well, I don't want to be a manager. I don't want to be a CEO. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not what I want to do. That's not the role that work plays in my life anymore. And there's a whole view that says, when they start needing money, they'll feel differently. I don't know, because it comes from an intrinsic place. And so, again, I just think it's such a fascinating time to be in the world of work less, because I think we're going to see many things converge at the same time. And you and I will look back, 20 years from now and be like, wow, who saw that coming? But I believe unleashing humanity in a way that we haven't seen before at the same time that technology is enabling that.
Yeah, totally. I say, okay, robots take it on, I'm going to have so much other things I can do. So as you look across industries and geographies and you have this kind of front row view, right? What do you think the next decade of work will look like? And maybe I should ask you 3 years, because maybe we can't even look at decades anymore.
And isn't that even the way you asked me the question? Remember the days of 10-year strategic plans, 10 years.
Yeah.
And now 3 years is like, what is 3 years going to look like? But I do think given adoption, so let's just take a step back and say, what would accelerate a different future? What would accelerate a different future? Um, AI adoption would probably accelerate, and not just by humans, that's part of it, but by companies, by governments. I study Europe closely and see what they're doing in terms of regulatory environment. And so we have a chance to really learn on how this path will come out slower or faster in certain places. But I think in the next 3 years, what we'll see is AI is going to come into automation. Automation is going to come into organizations that are seeking AI. And I say that with a lot of intention because we all will go in, and I spend a lot of my time talking to Fortune 200 companies around the world, and the AI topic is front and center. They'll say, well, we need to use AI. Okay, so what are you trying to achieve? And frequently what they're trying to achieve can be achieved through automation. And so we're going to think we're doing AI, but we're truly doing automation. And then when we automate, which means standard systems, standard data lakes, all those things have to be in place.
Existing processes.
Which is years in some cases for some companies and not so long for others. But I think within that 3-year horizon, we're going to see the rise of automation that sets the stage for AI as a generality. Like generally, that's what we'll see. I think in the tech world, there's a lot of talk about a tech bubble. Is that going to happen? An AI bubble? I don't know. What I would say is we need some large business cases that have proven benefit around agentic use and AI agent managers, things like that. We need a large scale business case. I think we will have a few proven in the next 3 years. I do not think it will be at the scale that we believe it's going to be. That doesn't mean it's not coming. I'm not a pessimist. I would say we need AI to take some jobs because we don't have enough humans. Or some tasks at least of jobs. But I don't think in 3 years, Nirit, that's going to be the big headline. It's going to be
no, but you're saying it's not about pessimism. Actually, I think it's about realism. I think we are almost treating this as an Excel spreadsheet, bring in agents, remove people. It doesn't work this way. And I actually recently wrote a piece about you can't implement AI as a software. Because it's not about it's exactly not about automation. So I think what you're really saying, which is really interesting, I don't think I've heard this before, is in our attempt to bring in enterprise AI, what we'll be doing in the next couple of years is increase automation for existing processes and systems and tools that we should have maybe automated, and now's the time. Then we'll figure out what we can actually really do with AI.
Absolutely. I'd say simplify, standardize, automate. Then AI will come. But you're right. We will go in with the intention of AI, and then we will modernize our systems and processes.
Yeah.
And then we will explore what AI can do for our business.
Yeah, which actually works really well with just the way people are with change management. You can't bring in change management on all dimensions, right? So basically, you're going to say, okay, we'll clean up, then the noise, and then people will start seeing what they really can generate that wasn't there before.
And it gives time for development of AI too. AI is just a baby in the world. It's a baby. Yeah. It's not well defined, and we want it to solve all of our challenges. And that's why, the one thing guidance I try to give to employers is be very clear on what's the problem you're seeking to solve. Because if it's just to implement AI, that is not a problem.
Yeah. There's a what for. Yeah, obviously. Okay. So if people listening to us want to stay relevant in this changing world of work, right? What advice would you give them?
And so first I would say, be a student of yourself. So don't let the organization define you. Don't let your degree define you. Be a student of yourself. There are a lot of online assessments that are free that you can do to say, what are the capabilities that I bring, the skills that I bring to the organization, and start talking about yourself that way. I had an amazing mentor very early in my career that said, what job do you want? And I said, I don't know what job that I want, but I can tell you what I'm good at. And that answer that I gave 25 years ago, that dates me a bit, but defines me today. I'm still good at those things. And so that's what we need to know. What are you actually good at? And what does that mean how you want to contribute in a workplace? So that would be the first thing I would say, be a student of yourself. I would also say it is important to be AI conversant. Understand what is automation, what is AI, what are agents, what are agent managers. we all need to be conversant. It doesn't mean we're experts. I am a student. I didn't grow up with AI. I'm a student of AI. I'm learning these things. So we need to make sure we're conversant enough to understand when our organization launches something, you can say, oh, is that RPA, or is that true, agentic AI? What is driving that? So I think that would be second. And I'll answer the question on the other side too, for employers. For
Yes.
employers, start thinking about assessment in new ways, assessing people on their skills and capabilities. Ask what I call the magic question. And this isn't a technology magic question. It's not by AI. The magic question is, at every mid-year review, I ask this question: what are capabilities that you have that you want to leverage for the organization, but you're not today? That has nothing to do with what job you're in. What are capabilities you have that you want? Because some things you have, you're at a season of life, you may not want to leverage it, but that you want to leverage for the organization, but you're not using today. I would highly encourage all of your people managers to ask that question in whatever your process is. You can ask it on a more regular basis, but at some point, ask that question. I have been so amazingly surprised by people that would raise their hand and say, I'm in marketing, but I have a credential in finance, and I'm pretty good at that. And I don't want to leave marketing, but I'd kind of like to explore that too, because we don't have to think of the organization, these silos anymore. We can think of the organization collapsed into outcomes. So that would be a big thing for employers. And also figure out how to leverage this environment where the classroom training is gone. That went away with COVID. Don't go back to that. Don't start investing in classroom training. Start investing in individual training, this N equal one human that is working for you, that is not like the other N equal one human, and start thinking of humans for the amazing, computers that we are as individuals and how we can contribute.
Fabulous. So Becky, I always end the conversations with a question instead of answer. So what's the one question you think we should all be asking ourselves?
Yeah. What
about the future of work?
Yeah. I think it's what role do I want work to play in my life?
Yeah.
That's what I would ask. What role do I want work to play in my life? And I think that gets to your definition of work, and it also gets into the relationship that you want to have. And then you would ask the next question, which is, okay, then what is left? And what do I want to do with what is left? And I love this new generation of Gen Zers that are doing, side hustles or a gig in their pocket. They're walking dogs while they're doing amazing defense contracting somewhere. I mean, they're remarkable. But that's the role they want work to play in their life. And then they're rounding out their passion with something totally different. And I love that freedom of, I am more than one job, and I choose what represents me as a human. And that's what I would ask.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Becky, for joining me today. For more about Becky and ManpowerGroup's latest insights, check out the links in the podcast description. Thank you for tuning in to The Future of Less Work. And remember, people do not work because you tell them to, because you measure them on it, not even because you pay them. They work because by working for you, they're doing what's important to them in life. Till next time.